everyone, you beautiful people. I've been told recently that people like to be called beautiful, people like to be told that they are somehow magnificent, so I'm trying to do that more for you guys. This is Tim Baker with my Tim's 2 cents, my new weekly rant, I guess is basically all it is. You may have heard me before on the You, Me, and BTC podcast, probably if you're listening to this network. It's with Daniel Brown. I do a podcast with Daniel Brown and Zach Vole every Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. Come check us out there. We do that live. This is not live, one, because I don't want to have to deal with the technical parts of that, and also this is just supposed to be me trying to get my thoughts out and not having my completely objective mind clouded by the group, the chats, thoughts, and ideas. But I do that every week. We do it, like I said, Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. That's with Daniel Brown and Zach Vole. Zach Vole also has his own podcast, comes out Tuesdays, called The Coin Pod. He does a lot of interviews on that. That is much more centered on Bitcoin, or not just Bitcoin, but cryptocurrencies, people involved in cryptocurrencies, thoughts around cryptocurrencies, but he always has somebody else to talk to. So if you don't like me just ranting for an entire hour, or I'm trying to cut them down because I feel like you guys, at some point I do get to the point where I'm just repeating myself about stuff. But if you do want to check that out, if you want to hear a discourse between two people, Zach's podcast is great too. So check him out. It's called The Coin Pod, again on the same network. But like I said, this is Tim's 2 cents. This is number 5. And this week, I want to talk about traditionalism. I've been having trouble finding a real definition for that, mostly because, not necessarily having trouble finding a definition for that, but finding a definition that doesn't have a particular focus on it. There's a lot of traditionalism. There's Western traditionalism. There's the, what was it called? The New Traditionalist, I believe it's called. Or the traditionalist movement, which was, I think, in the 19th century into now, where it was mostly concerned with people thinking that as the West as a whole was moving away from traditionalist political and religious values. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. I kind of want to talk about traditionalism in a general sense, because if I do start talking about all the iterations, this will be like 4 hours just to explain them in the first place, or even try to even touch the beginning of this stuff. Also, this is going to be interesting, because if you haven't listened to any of these before, I try to take an ism and try to either defend or say what's good about it, and then also try to tear it apart and say what's bad about it. Because, I mean, if we're being honest, most of the time, any belief system does have its flaws. Any belief system does have its dogma, where people will just inherently follow it, inherently just do certain things, not because of any kind of rational thought about it, not because of any rational dedication to it, but because it's just kind of what you do. It's what's called upon. I think that has a lot to do with traditionalism. And I guess I'll start out by, saying what I think is good about traditionalism, trying to defend it. And whether it's traditions like your family gets together every Thanksgiving and eats food without arguing too much, I don't know. That's what my family does. My family, unlike what I do on these podcasts every single week, multiple times a week, my family, pretty much at the gatherings, it's no talking about politics, no talking about religion. But then again, it's not a hard and fast rule. There's not like, my grandmother doesn't come out and just tell everybody before they give the grace on the meal or whatever the fuck they do. They don't come out and go, well, this week we're not going to talk, or this Easter we're not going to talk about Trump, and we're not going to talk about how some of you are Protestants, some of you are Lutherans, some of you are Catholics. It's just something we all kind of agree upon. And that's probably the first thing I do kind of like about traditionalism, just in a general sense, is that it does have the power, the ability, it has almost like a social glue to it that can bring people together and help people find a sense of purpose, find a sense of self inside of a group without having the violent kind of arm of government to force people into line. It has a certain, like, if you have a tradition, there's the song from Fiddler on the Roof. I don't know how it goes. I'm not huge into theater. In high school plays, I was involved. I was always the lighting guy, and my best memory of the plays was whenever I got to light and one of the girls backstage knocked one of the big backdrop set pieces over and it fell. Unfortunately, it didn't fall on anybody. That would have been even better. But at that point, everyone had filed off stage. They knocked it off. It fell down after. Still probably the best play I've ever seen. I've never gone to Broadway or any shit like that. But anyway, back to Fiddler on the Roof. There's a song, I think it's closer to the beginning, where the Tevye, the main character, talks about tradition. And that's kind of one of the main themes of the play where they speak about. And he's an older guy and he's wrestling with his children, who some of them want to break away from the old life. It's Russian Jews, so they do have a certain, like, they have food, they have dances, they have songs they all sing, they have all this stuff. But they whenever he gives his song about tradition, it talks about those kind of things and how those things can bring a community of people together, and how, because of, if you don't have those sorts of things, things do kind of start to fall apart. Whenever you don't have whenever you don't have those traditions, and maybe this is a case in, maybe you guys have even seen this in a family, if, say, like, your grandparents or your parents or whatever, every single year you go over their house, you have dinner on Christmas or Thanksgiving. Somebody dies, maybe both the grandparents die, whoever had the house where everybody met dies, and then maybe next year you guys all kind of come together to a new house. People, maybe not as many people come, maybe it's maybe everybody does. But generally, at some point, if there isn't the person holding it together, if there isn't the person who does kind of focus on repeating things for the sake of them happening before, people start to fall away. People start to not do that anymore. And there is something to be said where there is a positive to that. There is, like I said, a social glue that helps to hold people together. Especially as a family unit, where you kind of just all come together every year and just sit around a table, eat. You might have different celebrations, even amongst just a smaller part of your family. Like, you don't open Christmas gifts the day of. Maybe you open like one the night before. There's little things that kind of help to. We like those. We like the kind of repetition and the cycle, not the cycle, but the pattern of always doing that, because whenever you're doing it, it's kind of nice, it's kind of cool. It's like, oh, I did this like hey, do you remember when we did this 5 years ago? That's cool. We're still doing it. And then also you can look back on it and go, oh, isn't that so nice and sweet? We all did this for so long together. That's part with the family thing. But then also, and this is changing a little bit just because of how our society is changing, the people that we interact with is changing. The internet has been able to broaden who you have to interact with. You don't necessarily have to just interact with the people around you. I grew up in Pittsburgh. Daniel grew up the same place around us, but there is kind of this shared tradition, I guess you could even say, of like Pittsburgh is a sports town. Pittsburgh is real into football. I would say that's because they don't have anything else. It's an old steel town that then kind of died out, and we're kind of just, oh yeah, well, we still like the Steelers, we still like the Penguins. That's what I'm going to think about. I don't want to think about me not having a job in a steel mill anymore. Whatever. We'll get to that in the second half of the episode. But because of the internet, because of the ability to just go online, and instead of having to talk with people who are like geographically in your same area, we can just find our own interests. We can find, hey, I like this certain kind of book. I like writing. I like vaping. I like working out. And I can just go online and find those people and talk to them. And that has become kind of like a certain kind of, I mean, it's not a certain kind of, it is a new social group. It's a new social structure too, where you can have these other people, where you can communicate with people across the world. And now even with stuff like Bitcoin, you can just, outside of the government sending your mail around, you can send money, you can send all these kinds of things to people who are, I was about to say millions of miles away, just like thousands of miles away in the matter of a couple seconds. I do think that there is something to be said for society, and especially people who are left behind, people who aren't as involved online, that they see something where, oh, well, society isn't as close-knit, society isn't as not just inclusive, but just society doesn't feel as close-knit, because people do have that option to just opt out and not be completely on their own. Traditionalism can help with, again, this all goes back to, even if it's not in the family, it can help because we all know, we all have to agree that the reason why we don't all just get up and shoot each other in the face, and we don't just constantly steal from each other, isn't just because there's a police officer there or because the government makes it illegal. The reason why we don't do that is because we do see a certain value in voluntarily and peacefully interacting with each other. I think besides that, that's more where I think that people do it still today. But besides that, a while ago, there was also like what we're talking about, where there's this shared culture, there's these shared traditions in any certain geographic area where you can go, hey, I do the same thing as you, I do the same activities every single year, I do the same, I go to the same church, I go to the same school, I go to the same whatever, and that then is kind of like that first thing that you find that is similar to other people, the first thing that make kind of, it's an easy way to break the ice and not have to be awkward with people that you don't know necessarily, that you don't know personally. If, hey, you're from my same area, I like you better than a guy over in Detroit or something. Now there's always the jokes online about your best friend is just the person you found who hated the same things that you did. That was also true with traditionalism. That was also true with, okay, we have this certain set of rules that we kind of adhere to, these certain things that we believe in, fuck everything else. But there was a kind of shared experience for people, and we do find comfort in that normally. You find you're more comfortable around people who have experienced the same kinds of things. You're more comfortable around the kind of people who have the same interactions with you that you do. So there is that kind of, it's a voluntary kind of. I do want to talk about this a little bit after, because it's voluntary in the sense that, like I said, it isn't the government forcing you to necessarily perform work for this other person. It isn't the government forcing you to support your local community. It's just that you kind of have to be part of the community. And traditionalism and following traditions and kind of just going with things because that's how they did it in the past it's a nice little layer on top of that to help people want to do that, to help people kind of inherently feel a camaraderie with people in their same geographic area. It's a quick and easy and mostly peaceful alternative to forced cooperation and forced kind of intermingling of people to just share traditions. The best example I can think of is, I mean, it's not the best example, but I'll use it. In World War I, there's the famous thing about the German and French and British troops coming together over Christmas, kind of celebrating that. And something like that, and even though they had different traditions for that specific holiday, both groups shared a certain religious reverence, or a certain religion, a certain set of conduct they had around the holidays, and that was powerful enough to break through officers and everybody else telling them to kill each other, telling them to do whatever. Now, people would say that's not necessarily the best thing, to just have troops stop fighting, but in my opinion, that's probably the best thing as far as a tradition goes, and the way that tradition can help make us peaceful. And because that is, I think, a lot of what we talk about, a lot of what's liberty, the technology that we like as far as boosting liberty, is then technology that helps us to be peaceful while still boosting liberty. We can have plenty of different kinds of technology that boost liberty, but if it's something that doesn't necessarily bring us together more, a lot of people aren't for that. The mass of people are not for that. So something that, like, traditionalism wasn't a technology, but it is something that helps us to come together over something, come together over a Christmas dinner, come together over Easter egg hunting, come together over a shared experience. And that is mostly why I think traditionalism is good, mostly why I think that traditionalism can help bring people together without forcing them to through the arm of government. And that's pretty much the end of what I think it's good for, what I think it's because I don't necessarily follow with that just because an idea has had a long tradition of use, that necessarily means that it's a particularly good idea. It just means that it's just been easier to follow that than it has been to make a new one. So the second half, after this ad, I'm going to talk about why traditionalism is stupid and why it doesn't always work out to help us make us more peaceful.
Hey guys, today's show is brought to you by Chronologic.network. Chronologic is an Ethereum-based project that aims to solve time-related problems on the blockchain. Through Chronologic's 3 core products, the Ethereum alarm clock, debt smart contracts, and the day token minting mechanism, they solve the problems of payment scheduling, crypto loan time constraints, and unstable token launches. Find out more at Chronologic.network.
So, hope you guys liked the ad. Hope you enjoyed hearing Daniel's voice. I know I sure as fuck didn't, but hopefully you guys did. Hopefully you guys didn't mind it too much. But I want to start off this section, this second half of, there's a quote by probably my favorite comedian, Doug Stanhope, and it goes something like, you just look it up if you're really that concerned with it, but tradition and heritage is just old people's baggage. Stop carrying it around and move forward. And that makes complete sense to me. That is true. Like, regardless if you think that traditionalism, if you think that any of this old shit is useful or not, it is just, the only power it has over you is because dead people did it a while ago, and therefore that's the weight that it has. Because generally traditionalist values, tradition, they're not, whether or not they do show to be more useful, if you look at how people act, if you look at how people behave, or whatever that is, you can bring up whatever stupid graphs you want, whatever, people were happier back in the 50s whenever we had blah, 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 blah. Regardless of any of that shit, you do have to admit that most of the weight and most of the reason why people still follow it is just because it has been done in the past, and it's easier than doing something different. It's easier than trying to find something new and trying to find a better way to engage as a group, and a better way to incentivize people to be peaceful and to want to engage with each other. And that's not necessarily good. That does do a disservice to progress. That does it holds things back whenever you were constantly going, no, but they did stuff good before, and why would you ever try? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But you can't see that it's broken until you try to fix it sometimes. You can't use the same kind of analogy you're going to use for a running engine or a business practice you can't use that to explain away society. That we're a little bit more complicated than an engine or something like that. We're a little bit more complicated than a piece of machinery that just automatically does what it does, and then you don't want to fuck with that because it's doing a fine job. We don't have that kind of ability to just suck ourselves out of society and look at it objectively most of the time. It's generally just that this is the way things have always been done. Why would you want to change that? And you can look at that with things like racism, sexism, homophobia, the xenophobia, any of this stuff. And especially, I'm going to talk about xenophobia. This whole thing about now it's Mexicans, now it's illegal immigrants, now it's anyone coming from that area, it's immigrants from the Middle East, it's blah, 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 blah. That idea of, well, they're going to come and they're going to ruin our society and they're going to come and murder everybody and they have no respect for our values. It's literally the same argument that was used against Irish and Italians and Jews and everybody throughout 80 years ago. So it's not a new argument. Again, it's like I can see where the argument comes from as far as like, yeah, no, people are different and people are going to change your society and people are going to impart their ideas on your society if you bring them into your society. But okay, so it's not, you can't be that rigid in your ideas. I mean, you can be. That I can't say that you can't be, but as far as ever making progress, as far as developing yourself, developing a society in general, it's never good to just go, well, we're just going to stay here, we're going to have the same group of people, we're going to have the same ethnic percentages, we're going to have the same whatever. That doesn't lend itself to anything developing past what you already have. If you think we've found the best government, if we found the best society, I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know where you get I don't know what you're looking at as this being the God-blessed democracy, God-blessed America, and then this is the ultimate pinnacle of his creation. This is the ultimate pinnacle of human evolution. I don't know how you get that, seeing as how it is fucked up, and every single progression we've made in history has been fought against with that same kind of logic, that same kind of thinking that, well, this is going to ruin everything, this is going to take away from our hundreds of years of tradition and traditional values, and this is going to, basically their idea is just ruin it. Again, why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it because you might break it. Also, traditionalism, besides the xenophobia, besides all the kind of nastiness that comes out of it, besides the actual hatred that comes out of it, it's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy for that. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy for hating whatever it is that you want to, because you can say, see, my ancestors didn't like this, and it's because they knew that you would try to change things. And it's like, yeah, people try to change things. That's what we do. That's what, if you're coming into a new situation, if you're coming into a new place, you're going to change stuff. I get annoyed when I see these people on Twitter. It's always, I came to the United States as an immigrant back when I was in my teens, and I never tried to change anything. I never tried to, bullshit. You did have some kind of a change. You didn't just completely assimilate to the community. That's not how we work. That's not how people work. You bring something of your own, again, traditions. You bring something of your past, and that's not necessarily good either. In the same way that I'm saying that the kind of traditionalism that says you can't bring new people bringing in their old traditions too isn't necessary. It's not a well thought out. It's not an idea that you hold on to because it's proven. Necessarily. That is how it has worked in the past, but that doesn't mean that that's how it's going to work in 5 years or 10 years. Or that's not even to say that that was the best thing you could be doing 100 years ago. That has no merit on an argument just because people used to do it and it worked. The government runs things all the time. Yeah, the trains run on time, the airplanes fly, blah, it's whatever. But that doesn't give you any particular... It doesn't mean that you are correct whenever you say that that is the best way to do things. It's just not it's not a rational argument to say that just because it has happened like that in the past, that is the absolute best way to do things. Traditionalism it's exactly what I said with the quote before. It's around and it's perpetuated because we have a certain respect for people who've come before us, which, like I said in the beginning, I get. It's kind of ingrained in us. It's the way that we've survived for a while. It's the way that we have built societies, is by going, hey, we used to do this kind of thing. We should probably keep on doing it because that'll make sure that things work. But also, the way that we've built societies and the way that we've built anything has been going, hey, we can try something different, because nothing new, nothing progressive, nothing that's going to actually change the world ever happens because you decide to do something that we've been doing for the past 100 years. You can't break out, you can't make a difference in the world by doing the same thing that we have been doing. All like that kind of, and beyond what that particular action, what that particular idea is going to do, instilling that kind of respect, that kind of omnipotence that you look at tradition with, instilling that inside of people's heads, instilling in kids' heads that the best thing to do is just look at what your grandfather did, doesn't give itself to a society that will be anything besides what it has been for the past 100 years. It's not, it can't, it won't progress in any way that you want to look at that, because nobody is completely, in the same way that nobody is completely a progressive. Everybody has these certain traditions that they do like. Nobody, even Marxists, even people who are like, we need to completely tear down this new system, even anarcho-capitalists, even libertarians, how they're saying everything is terrible, it's been terrible for a while. None of them then go and say, hey, I think this is just something, a completely new idea, because that is ignorant to say that you're having a completely new idea. But they use arguments from people 100 years ago, 80 years ago. They use arguments from guys who have been dead decades to make their point for how we should do things today and how we should do things going forward. They do have a certain tradition that they take from. But then also a traditionalist isn't just going to, most traditionalists, they don't necessarily want, no traditionalist is going to say, I never want progress, I never want anything to ever change, I want society to completely stagnate and stay exactly how it has been for the next 300 years, because one, we do, everybody sees the kind of stupidity that is, the kind of trouble that we'd fall into if we did do that. But also, everybody has their little pet thing. They're like, oh yeah, but we can progress here. baby boomers and all these people, they'll talk about how great it was back in the 50s, but they're the ones who voted in all these austerity, or not austerity, the opposite of that. They're the ones who brought in this whole welfare state. They're the ones who brought in everything like this, and then go, oh, I don't understand why you can't do this anymore. And even their parents, they talk about everybody's just lazy today. Everybody's terrible. Well, we developed all this new shit, and it's keeping you alive now. So if you're really against any kind of progress, if you're against any kind of development, nobody actually believes that. So, and I guess I can't really talk about this too much more, because I will just be repeating myself over and over again. But I guess this is the part where I'm going to try to figure out where we go from my last half-hour rant. Traditionalism is good as far as it can bring people together, as far as it can hold a group together, as far as it can inform people as part of a, hey, we do these things, we kind of work together, we have these shared experiences, and that does bring us closer together. That brings the average person closer together better than trying to argue with them of some kind of liberty oriented, like, if I'm looking at this as a libertarian, if I'm looking at this as somebody who wants to promote the ideas of liberty, it's much easier to do that in a society that has a tradition of liberty and free property and property rights and freedom. It's much easier to convince somebody to act that way through tradition and through kind of social norms than to argue them into that position from a society that doesn't have those traditions. It's much easier to make somebody peaceful through the traditions and through just giving them a shared experience with the people around them. It's much easier to make them peaceful and willing to engage with other people than to argue them into that position. Traditionalism is bad when it teaches us to hate particular things, when it teaches you to, whenever you do just take the baggage of dead people and you try to apply it to your life and you try to force it into a situation that, one, isn't in the time that it was developed before, and then two, is assuming that it was the best possible decision for those people in that time period. Traditionalism is bad whenever it is blindly followed as a source of wisdom, when it's not a tried and true, as they would say. It's not a tried and true method. It's more just something that we just did. It isn't a free open market of ideas. It's just, you do this and you don't do anything else. And if you don't do this, you're kind of a social pariah. So in short, I guess, traditionalism is good for as far as it will make you, it will help push you into the way of following certain social things around you. Generally, people, if we're engaged socially, do better having that same kind of shared ideas, shared experiences, and it's better than like an intellectual argument. It's bad when you then can't have a logical argument, a philosophical argument, because tradition is looked at as the end all be all and the best possible answer for any questions you might have. It's not a good thing to look at, and it's not a good thing to embrace whenever you are looking to make progress in any certain area or a field of research or anything like that. So that was the episode. It's traditionalism. If you guys like traditionalism, or if you hate it, tweet me at bakersdozen93. Also tweet me if you like the ad. Hit them up. Tell them you've heard it through my show. If you heard it through Zach's show, tell them you still heard it through my show, because it'll look better for me. If you hear it on any of our shows, tell them you heard it through Tim's 2 cents, because it'll look better for me, and then I can demand Daniel pays me more money. Just tweet me if you have any isms you want me to particularly talk about. I'll try to do my best and look at them, try to figure out something before I just start spouting nonsense about it. Tweet me if you hated something about this episode. Tweet me if you loved it. Regardless, I hope you guys have a good week. Look forward to Zach tomorrow on Tuesday with the Coin Pod, and then pretty much every single week catch us on Yumi and BTC with our live show at 9 p.m. Eastern every Thursday night. And that's, again, Daniel Brown, Zach Vole, and me. We do a live show. You can come in there. You can chat with us in the troll box. You can get what's the phrase? I mean, you can be involved in the live. Instead of having to tweet one of us after, you can, or leaving comments on something after, you can be there right there if you do have a question or if you do want to get involved with the discussion. We always read stuff from the chat, so get us there. Bye. Have a good week, guys. Love you.